Hello again. Now we're going to talk about the topic of binding, which sounds pretty strange, but it's really important when you're dealing with the understanding of how variables work in a language. So, first of all, I'm going to give you kind of a formal-ish sounding definition of binding. So, a binding is an association between a variable and an attribute of a variable. Now, you should know by now what the different types of attributes are. All right, and so I'm going to just list them again. We've got name, address, value, type, lifetime, and scope. So binding is concerned with making these associations, the name, address, value, type, lifetime, and scope, with a variable. So an example of something like this might be int count. So by declaring this variable count, there's a whole bunch of bindings that are occurring here, right? The name count is is bound to the variable. There's type, which is immediately bound to the variable. Depending on the language, when that line of code gets executed, there may be a value that's immediately assigned to the variable. For example, in C++, the value that's assigned to the variable is the memory location, whatever is hanging out in the memory cell that the variable is bound to. So whatever the address is and the memory cell associated with that address, that's going to be the initial value of count. So it could be 0, but more likely it's something else. One of the ways in C++, interestingly, now we're sort of getting on a tangent here, but it's kind of cool, is in C++, in sorry, in IBM implementations of certain hardware, memory locations which didn't have any values that were set in them or initialized would have the following hex value associated with them. So this is 1, this would be 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 bytes. So if you declared an int count, and that int count was bound to a memory location that hadn't been initialized, the value of count in hex would be dead beef. Kind of cool. All right. So now you know what a binding is, and I've given you an example of a binding, but there's things we worry about. There's things we want to know about in relation to bindings and variables. So one of the things that we really want to know when we're working with variables in a language is the binding time. So this is answering the question, when does the binding occur? So we have those 6 attributes which can be bound to a variable, and then the question is, when do each of those attributes actually get bound to a variable? And it's very different depending on which language that you're working with. So one question I'd ask you to do, just hit pause to answer this, is think about for a moment, what are there, when you use a variable in a language, let's say you just wrote some code, All right, and maybe I'll give an example actually. That might be a good idea. So